Hello. You can hear me. Excellent. Yay. My name is Sophia Nahlawi, author event coordinator here at the Pratt Library, and thank you for joining us this evening. Some housekeeping. Tonight will be a moderated conversation for 45 minutes, a Q&A for the last 15 minutes, and a book sighting after the program right outside. Snug Books is our book-selling partner this evening, and they are selling copies of tonight's book. So if you would like to go home one book richer, tonight is your night. And so now, onwards. Tonight, I'm happy to welcome Tochi Onyebuchi to the Pratt Library to discuss his latest book, Racebook, A Personal History of the Internet. When Tochi Onyebuchi realized that his acclaimed science fiction and fantasy storytelling career had been centrally preoccupied with race, it prompted him to consider his responsibilities as a Black writer in the internet age. Excavating the Internet of the late 1990s and early 2000s, Racebook explores how the writer and public intellectual Onyebuchi is today. A new, compelling investigation of race through the lens of the modern internet age, and a profound intellectual journey in pursuit of community online, Onyebuchi argues for a liberation of the individual behind the code, ultimately asking, is this a race book or is it not? Is it either or? Can it be both and? Can I? Tochi Onyebuchi will be joined in conversation this evening by award-winning author Danielle Evans. Tochi Onyebuchi is the Hugo and NAACP Image Award finalist and author of Goliath, Riot Baby, the Beast Made of Night series, and the War Girls series. I've read them all, they're very good. His short fiction has appeared in the Best American Science Fiction and Fantasy, the year's Best Science Fiction, and elsewhere. His nonfiction includes the book Skinfolk and has appeared in the New York Times, NPR, and the Harvard Journal of African American Public Policy, among other places. He has earned degrees from Yale University, New York University's Tisch School of the Arts, Columbia Law School, and the Paris Institute of Political Studies. Danielle Evans is the author of the award-winning story collections, The Office of Historical Corrections, and Before You Suffocate Your Own Fool Self. She is a professor in the writing seminars at Johns Hopkins University. In a starred review from Booklist, they called Racebook's essays filled with nostalgic gaming references, musings on the current state of the internet, social media follies, and a surprising amount of German. Onyebuchi uses his fascinating life story as the backbone for his book, and readers learn as much about his background as they do about how the internet has changed and grown. Recommended for readers who want to explore the internet as it was, is, and will be, and how one person's unique perspective can elucidate universal truths. In another starred review, Publishers Weekly called Racebook poetic and insightful. This is a must-read. An author and New Yorker staff writer, Jelani Cobb, wrote, starkly original, provocative, and brilliantly executed, Racebook warrants our undivided attention. Onyebuchi is a sage observer of this fractured moment and among the internet's keenest interlocutors. It is my great pleasure to welcome Tochi Onyebuchi and Danielle Evans.
Hello,
Hello, hello.
and welcome to Baltimore.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for doing us the honor of being your first stop on this book's official launch day.
It is.
Happy birthday to Racebook.
It is
And-
my pleasure.
And congratulations. So I'm going to start with, I mean, there's so much in this project, some of which feels very timely, some of which is a kind of meditative history of the internet or of different kinds of pop culture that have influenced your own relationship to the internet. What brought you to this project now?
I mean, I think part of it was I had one nonfiction book in 2021, Skinfolk, and I realized that I really liked writing nonfiction. I had a few essays sort of scattered throughout, and I was going through with my agent at the time, my bibliography, and I was like, it'd be really nice if we could, put together an essay collection. It's just I don't know what I would write about, I started thinking about, okay, what are some like anxieties that I'm currently working through or like thinking about. And one of them was that in looking back at my bibliography, I noticed that the books that I had written and that I had published, I don't know if the version of me who was a younger writer and really, really in love with the craft would recognize that output, right? And that was, I didn't quite know how to feel about that. And so I was like, okay, maybe I can write a series of essays or a book like about that. And then he was like, yeah, but also like write about the internet. And I was like, another millennial writing about the internet. But the more I thought about it, the more I came to the conclusion that the difference between the writer I was and the writer that I had become, the internet had something to do with that. And so the collection then became a series of attempts at trying to excavate that and trying to get at how exactly did that happen.
Yeah, it was interesting to me. There's an essay in which you talk about the kind of attempt to write the internet novel and get the internet on the page, and the varying ways books have either attempted that or been pressed into being read as though that's what they were attempting, whether or not that was their intention. But it struck me that in some ways, the essay form feels like a natural way to write about the internet because it does capture something of that sort of associative quality of that, like, we can go down different rabbit holes and come back and tie all these things together that we wouldn't have thought of, and kind of recognize something in contrast just from kind of jumping back and forth between topics. But I wondered if there was something that you felt that the essay form gave you in this project, or the particular reason why, as a writer of acclaimed fiction and who works in multiple genres, you chose the essay form for this particular book.
I mean, so I was thinking of an answer that, would have involved, the essay collection is a hyperlinked document, and each chapter, a specific rabbit hole that you could fall under, as you were sort of trawling Wikipedia. But really, at the end of the day, it was because I was having a lot of fun writing nonfiction, and I was like, because it was a way for me to exercise different muscles than I normally get to exercise writing fiction. So that, I think, was it made me feel good, and I was like, I want to keep chasing this, so I'm going to write more essays. And also, it felt refreshing having an opinion and being able to just like directly vocalize it. Instead of having to dress it up in a character and a point of view and a situation and a setting, all of which I love doing, but it was also very refreshing to be able to say, I think that the 2007-2008 writers' strike, had something to do with, Donald Trump being elected president, and like being able to just like say all that instead of dramatizing it in a novel. It was nice.
So I keep coming to this library and asking writers about the apocalypse, and somehow they keep having me back. But I have. I think there are two parts to this question, because I was reading with a kind of delight and weary recognition one of your essays in which you were talking about the sort of pressure on Black fiction in particular to create a sense of optimism, right? That there wants to be a linear narrative of progress, that there's this idea that, we'll put the racism in the book and then we'll conquer the racism by the end of the book, and that will show people that we've made progress. And it's a sort of reductive trap to be pushed into as a writer, and also it makes people sometimes unhappy if your conclusion is more pessimistic than that, even though sometimes that pessimism is just realism. I have a friend who does a lot of environmental journalism, and I remember talking to her once and saying she would basically get, sometimes literally, but versions of the same questions after every reading, where people would say, but what can you tell us that will give us hope, or where is the hope in this story? And she would find ways to answer it, but she's like, what I really want to say is, what have you done to deserve hope? And I think that, so partly I'm thinking about the project of writing about race, of writing about the internet, and what have we done to deserve hope, but also there is a sort of hopeful vision of what, not an inevitable vision, but a hopeful vision of what this project could become. At the end of the book, but also sort of throughout the book, there are versions of hope. And there's a kind of hopefulness to writing a book at all, right? There's a way that you have to sit down to create a long-term project like this and think, there's going to be a future in which books exist and people read them and we are having a conversation about meaningful things together. So part one of the question is, how do you get to that personal hope? How do you do a project like this that asks you to look at some really bleak things and some things that don't have obvious sort of are obviously moving in the direction of progress, but also broadly, have we done anything to deserve hope? And what might hope look like structurally for a different kind of relationship to the internet, technology, race? You can pick a lane.
Oh, this is such a beautiful and it's just the layers to this question. Oh my goodness. So I think it was certainly with Riot Baby, but I think also with Goliath, I started trying to figure out more specifically where I locate hope, because both are very, I guess you could say, outwardly pessimistic books, but at the same time, to the point that you were making, there is this sort of reaching for hope that exists in every attempt to tell a story, write a book, particularly with an audience in mind who will hopefully receive that work and have their own sort of personal and artistic experience with it. And I realized that, I had this idea of the sort of overall sort of pessimism in the general state of affairs, but at the same time, I believe in God, in an sort of benevolent God, but it's a very sort of personal relationship. So it's like there's this island of hope and love in the midst of this sea of madness. And so while the world may be falling apart, while apocalypse may be happening, I can have this relationship with this, this being who I believe is operating out of love for me. And it's sort of like that with interpersonal relationships. So it's like the world may be falling apart, but me and my loved ones, we can be going through this thing together. And that's so preferable to going through the end of the world alone, right? And so I think to get to the first part of the question, there's the moments of connectivity between human beings, which I think can be so powerful, but at the same time can feel so small when juxtaposed against the collapse of Western civilization or everything that's going on right now. And then, the second part of your question, I'm gonna try to see if I remember it correctly, but I think in terms of carrying a hopefulness into the future, particularly with our relationship with tech and the internet, I think what's interesting is at least what I've noticed is people have been getting much more intentional about how they use the internet and how they respond to popular narratives of the internet. For years now, we've been fed this narrative of the inevitability of AI and how it's going to be everywhere, and you better learn how to use it, or somebody who knows how to use it is going to take your job, and this, that, and the third, right? AI's here to stay. But the fact of the matter is, if you don't have to use ChatGPT. You don't have to use it. You don't have to use, all these other, apps. You don't have to use Midjourney if you're a filmmaker. You don't have to use Sora. You're not obligated to use any of these things. And in fact, we're seeing this sort of, I guess you could call it a techlash, where people are like, ew, to this AI stuff. They're like, we're calling it slop. We don't actually want it. And that, to me, is a signal of hope, that there isn't this inevitability to this sort of, quote unquote machine takeover or what have you, that there is still this prizing of the human element, that interpersonal connectivity that can exist and be mediated through works of art and whatnot. And so, when you see like individual instances of people pushing back against tech, it can still feel very small when juxtaposed against like all the billions and billions and billions of dollars that are being funneled into this bubble. But when you realize that there are millions upon millions of these small interpersonal moments of pushback, like that, I think is cause for hope.
And one of the essays you write a little bit about your time working in a field kind of adjacent to content moderation and that being a kind of one of those processes which is actually very human and sometimes very intensely emotional human work that gets kind of through this process made invisible to the user so that it feels almost automated or recognized, but it's actually a human being doing the job of kind of witnessing sometimes atrocity or sometimes just maybe something they don't really want to see. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about that experience and also think about that in relationship to AI. It feels like on the one hand, trying to mechanize really all those processes that have always been human work could fall apart very quickly. That's one version of the future. It also feels possible that that's a sort of rendering invisible how much human labor is holding the machine up. Could be another. So I wonder, in your expert opinion, if you have a sense of where that's headed, but also if you could talk some more about kind of how we perceive as automated processes that are actually very human.
Oh yeah, no, it's so Wizard of Ozzy. Like somebody had to teach ChatGPT like what, if you ask ChatGPT to like pump out an autopsy report, right? And ChatGPT sort of knows the things that it's like spitting out. And somebody had to teach ChatGPT all those things. Somebody had to show ChatGPT what, pick your horrific thing looks like, right? Or descriptions of these things. And like a real human being had to do that. Real human beings had to do that. So like 2017, I started this job at this tech company in Manhattan, and we sort of, I guess you could say the job was event detection. So basically trying to figure out or find out what was going on in the world before other people knew about it. And it could be everything from a Travis Scott album drop to whatever was happening with the Kardashians to a terrorist attack in Barcelona and everything in between. And so what this entailed was basically having my eyeballs pressed up against the worst of the internet for like 8.5 hours a day, 5 days a week, sometimes on the weekends. And that, I don't think we realized it at the time that like this was the stuff that was going to power AI, like sort of all around. But I remember while I was at that job, there was an expose in The Verge that came out on content moderators. And these are people that would work for contractors that worked with places like Meta and OpenAI and whatnot. And so these people wouldn't be actual employees, like, eligible for benefits and all that. They'd be contract workers, basically paid pennies to look at like ISIS beheadings and like basically to keep people's news feeds on Facebook clean, or any other sort of parts of the internet or YouTube or what have you, basically flagging objectionable or extreme material and taking that down. And so these are people that would like, I remember there was a story of this one guy who like, he had these two monitors, and on one was Battlestar Galactica, which he was like watching through, and then on the other was like cartel execution videos that he had to like flag and get off of. And like this was just how he spent his day. And so like people, oftentimes apps like ChatGPT and a lot of the other sort of AI apps are looked at as these sorts, it's like magic, right? Like this thing that's just, sui generis, generating this like, video or this like report or spreadsheet or whatever, right? A human being had to train, the app to do that, had to give it all of the material to know how to know how to do that, and that human being was exploited. You know, that human being was paid like 25 cents, you know, to do that thing. And so like that's really like where a lot of my sort of suspicion of that type of tech comes from, is that the machine's not like doing the thing. There's always a human being making it happen. I mean, that's part of why, you know, these apps had to, you know, pillage all that artistic work and whatnot. They had to, you know, they exist because of human effort, and they're going to keep existing because of human effort. And if you try to extract the human from the equation at any point, then the whole thing sort of falls apart. And so I think, you know, I know I'm like rambling at this point, but I think once it gets to the point where the money starts to dry up, then maybe we can start to sort of say goodbye to the mass psychogenic illness that is AI hype.
Thank you. So I think I'm like a micro generation older than you, and I read this book sometimes with like intense recognition and sometimes like bizarro world, because I think that I don't know, I think just having just barely come of age before the internet was slightly different than kind of growing up with it. And I think the internet came to our houses on like AOL CDs, but also with this sort of intense admonition that like stranger danger was like in your house now, and it could find you and it could kill you, you know. And I think that is always, and so not that I haven't had like joy and meaning through the internet, but it is always, I think I've always approached it as a thing that is somewhat menacing and might mean me harm. I think you write a little bit about, which I think a well-documented phenomenon of people being sometimes bolder or braver on the internet than they are in their real lives. And I think that I've always had the opposite experience, where like, I know who I'm talking to if I'm popping my mouth off in person, right? I can calibrate accordingly. If I'm like rambling on the internet, I don't know who's gonna find me and come after. I think that just it was sort of drilled into me as like a 12-year-old girl, like this box is full of people who wish to like find you and harm you. And that might have just been part of adolescence in general. Like being an adolescent girl in general, I think people are always just like, the world is trying to find you and kill you.
No, but that's so real though. I mean, and it just goes to show too that like we're not decontextualized in our use of the internet, right? Because like, you know, there's this idea, or at least with the early internet, that, you know, you could get online and you were sort of faceless. You were whoever you like wanted to be. But like my experience of that internet and your experience of that internet, like by virtue of like me being a het cis male, is going to be like categorically different. And it's like, you know, taking the internet out of the computer and putting it, you know, for instance, you know, expanding it to like Xbox Live. Oh my goodness. Oh, you want to talk about people popping off at the mouth and not being afraid of consequences? Oh my God. I don't know if, like, I look at Xbox Live in the Halo 2 days and I'm like, you know what? I'm not sure that the internet was a good idea. Like, I don't know if it was a net positive.
But there's something really beautiful you write about a lot of that Web 1.0 experience. And I think, and it's not that I didn't have any of that. I think it's just, it's almost like there's an inversion of, there's a part where you sort of invoke a TV metaphor for like something that's supposed to be a big thing, but it's just a box of confetti. And I feel like every couple of years the internet's like, oh, I'm just a box that wants to kill you. And I'm like, oh, okay, I knew it. That's what I was warned of. But I do think that there's something really beautiful and generous in your description of what it made possible. So I guess that's maybe this is a variation of the question about hope, but like the version of the internet you fell in love with, like what did it give you?
I mean, you know what's interesting? It gave me the things I liked. And what I mean by that is, I think I appreciated that internet so much because I spent so little time on it. Like, I was outside, like, you know, that was where I spent most of my life. It was school and snowboarding, and like I was really into extreme sports as a kid. And what I would find online were like, you know, clips from the X Games, or like I would find my favorite snowboarders and like look at clips of the, you know, that they made, and then like I would go on. I don't know if the statute of limitations is passed, but like I would go on Napster and I would get like, you know, my favorite metal songs, and I would put together these like music videos and like that was how I used the internet. I would go on the internet to look at Dragon Ball Z like fan pages and stuff. So it was, the internet to me, like it felt smaller, but I think largely because it consisted in my experience of it almost entirely of stuff that I liked. It never occurred to me to like go on the internet to get angry about something. Like that's wild to me. Even now, like that's wild to me. You go online to like feel bad about things, like on purpose. So I try to remember that, this is a thing that the internet can be for. Going online to like feel good about things, and not good as in like, oh, I'm validated in my political opinions, because I mean that can be a type of good, but good is in like, oh, like this thing that I love, this other person loves it too, or like, oh, this is a really cool thing I just saw, or oh, this new song, like. You can be happy on the internet, and I feel like there was a point at which we'd forgotten that.
You do a thing in a couple of these essays that is both very cool and to me slightly terrifying, which is revisit some of your own work as a fiction writer with a kind of critical lens and put it in conversation with some of your own work, but also with sort of other writers and projects. And I'm interested in that process of revisiting the novels and the stories. Did you discover anything that surprised you in terms of looking back at that work? What was it like to kind of reread with a different eye?
Oh man, it's an interesting question, because it's funny because when I write, almost everything that I do is sort of in service of the thing that I'm working on. So, rereading stuff that I'd written before, I didn't really think about it outside of the context of how it was going to serve the essay that I was currently working on. But now looking back on it, I mean, I do think one thing that I'm looking for constantly is growth. Like I always want to be getting better. And part of that is just because I love writing so much that I want to do it justice. Like I want to feel like I'm honoring the craft by like getting better. So even though the thing that I'm working on may feel like the best thing I've ever written, I need, looking back at previous stuff that has also felt like the best thing I'd ever written, is like, oddly enough, reassurance that like I will write a thing that's better than the thing that I'm currently working on. And so I think that is like the primary vector of my experience of rereading old stuff. But there's also like moments of, wow, I really wrote that? Like that came out of it, what? But also too, an interesting thing revisiting old things is that sometimes I'll be able to remember the emotional state I was in when I wrote that particular scene, or like where I was geographically, physically, like what was happening in my life when I wrote that. And that's really cool too, to like walk down memory lane in that respect.
Yeah, there's some really beautiful writing here about video games and the experience of playing them. And I think for some reason I reject alternate endings in movies and in fiction. I'm like, that is just like, you just had to pick one. Why didn't you pick one? But I allow them in video games because it seems like it's a consequence of your choices in a way that I'm like, of course, there are infinite possibilities. And so there seemed to be something interesting about the time we spend in worlds that like literally have a multitude of possibilities or a multitude of outcomes as a way of thinking through some of these questions. And I wondered, in kind of revisiting that experience, was there anything in going back to that you were, because I was surprised sometimes by how much I was moved by some of the video game essays and how much they sort of did seem to tie to like not just the gameplay, but other things that were happening in your life, or as a way of thinking about other things in your life in this sort of expansive way. What was it like to kind of revisit that experience and to kind of apply what feels like an analytical lens to something that seems like it's also been a space that you can kind of disappear into when you needed to?
It's funny, there was a moment where I worried a little bit, because sometimes you have this thing that you love, right? And you love it sort of uncritically. You just like enjoy it. It's a thing that you can come back to whenever you need to like feel good, or like to forget the things that's making you feel bad. And there's a worry that when you start thinking critically about it, that some of that magic is going to go away. Like the thing that you thought was gold was actually rust. And I worried that that was going to happen with my experience of video games if I started writing about video games. But writing is also how I like understand the world. Like, I don't know that I will have an opinion about something until I write my way to that opinion. Like, I have to figure out what I think about a thing before I know what I think about it. And it also, part of me was kind of looking forward to being able to think critically about video games. Because they are an important part of my life. Like, there's an essay in there about this game Sekiro and the company From Software that does, like, they do the Dark Souls series, Elden Ring. They're known for making punishingly difficult video games. But the thing that happened to me while I was playing Sekiro, I essentially had a spiritual experience while playing this game. And it was very important to me, this experience. Like, it wasn't something to be belittled. It wasn't something like, oh, that's just a game. It was a meaningful thing that had happened to me during the course of playing this game. And I was like, okay, maybe this is, it stopped being, okay, maybe you'll ruin this by articulating it, and instead became, this is worth writing about. And once I got there, then I was like, okay, then I can write about, like, Mortal Kombat and Call of Duty too.
And I think one of the projects of this book is also to kind of assemble the different parts of your own life and career. So how did that go? No, that's not my real question. Did you, in that sort of process, were there things that you discovered were sort of had stayed with you longer than you expected them to, or things you were surprised by in terms of how much you needed, what you discovered when you went back to them or thought about, or things that you sort of knew you needed to write about that you got someplace interesting in the process of putting them into this book?
Oh, man. I mean, I think it's... So I guess I wonder if another form of the question is, like, was I surprised by what I found when I went digging? And I mean, to an extent, I don't know that I was surprised. Maybe I was. I'd have to think about this. I'd have to write about this, actually. No, I mean, I think what wound up on the page was stuff that I was reaching for, like stuff that I was kind of swimming through the depths of self to get to, places of myself I wanted to reach out and touch. But I was surprised by what the act of swimming through myself sort of jostled. Like, I did not expect to write an essay with all those German words in it. There's an essay in the book that is sort of structured around these specific and very long German words concerning memory. And I don't speak German. I have, like, no real history with the language. But all of a sudden, this became this fascination for me as I was working through that essay and putting it together and even conceptualizing it. So, like, stuff like that would happen. Or, like, with the internet novel essay, the way that thinking about ways of dramatizing the internet or narrativizing the internet tied into various anime that I watched. Like, that was a connection that I wasn't necessarily sure I was going to make before I made it. So it was sort of like, I wasn't necessarily surprised by what I found when I dove into myself, but I was pleasantly surprised by what the swimming, like, brought to the surface.
Yeah, I think there were so many moments of kind of tiny revelation here throughout the book where I would just sort of say, oh, like, I'd never thought of that way before, those things in conversation. Like, there's a moment when you kind of have an aside about thinking about the internet in terms through the lens of nationalism. And I was an anthropology major, so I'm always like, poor Benedict Anderson in that, like, one page that everyone cites for his definition. But also I was like, it had never occurred to me to apply it to the internet, to think about this sort of building and then, like, reifying of ideas of boundaries and kind of, and it was so interesting to me, and there were things where, like, it worked in that essay, but it was also like I could read a whole essay about just this. Were there things that once you visited them here, you thought, I'm going to go back to that later and spend more time with it, or is this project put to bed and the next project is something else entirely in a way to get away from it?
I mean, I think the example that you brought up is very poignant to me because like I was a poli-sci major in college, and very grateful that I was, because it gave me stuff to write about. Like I don't know who I'd be as a writer if I were an English major and like just wrote about myself. And so thinking of the internet in terms of, I also studied like nationalism a lot. So thinking of the internet in terms of a place where personal political processes could happen in terms of the identities that we assumed or the identities that we shrugged off every time we passed through the portal. That was very interesting to me as a framework. And that I think is something that I could find myself coming back to. I've also been like brainstorming another collection, and I had so much fun writing about video games for this book that I think I want to do it again. So I may follow that trail.
And I know, like especially day one, the book launch is always a slightly vulnerable time in which you're like, this has been yours for so long, and then it belongs to everybody. But what are you excited about having a chance to talk to people about in this book? What are you sort of anxious for people to read and see? Because I think that it's sort of like, you get to have part of the conversation in your head, and then it's out in the world, and you somehow hear back from yourself, and it's both terrifying and like free therapy, because people come up to you and tell you what your obsessions are, or respond to things in ways that get you new places. So what are you excited about having this book in the world, and what are you looking forward to talking to people about?
I'm looking forward to talking about all of it, and like all the stuff that I don't expect to be talking about too, like all the stuff that people are going to be bringing of their own experience to, the conversation. I have no idea how this book is going to be received. Like, I have no idea if people are going to like it, if people are going to be like, oh, brother, this guy stinks. Like, they might throw tomatoes at me. I don't know. But
I see no tomatoes. No tomatoes, right?
It's like nobody's reaching in their coat pocket. I think I'm just excited because I don't know what to expect as far as how people are going to receive the work, what they're going to vibe with in it, what will get them to think, what will get them to feel. Like I have no idea what y'all are gonna like about this book, but I do hope that there's something in it that you like about the book. But also too, it is very personal and very vulnerable, and not vulnerable in a sort of, okay, here's this traumatic thing that happened to me, and I'm just like, bleeding on the page for you. Like personal and vulnerable in that, okay, this is a thing that I care very deeply about. This is a thing that matters to me. This is a thing that brings me an incredible amount of solace and that I need to believe in. And here I am sharing that thing with you. Like that kind of vulnerability, which I think is can be a very rewarding experience, because I do think that, at least in my experience, people tend to respond very meaningfully to that, as opposed to, they do respond to the other thing, but like I'll give an example, and I know I have a nasty habit of rambling, but there's an essay in the book, Select Difficulty, which is about playing the game The Last of Us, and playing it around the anniversary, I think it's like 18-year anniversary of my father passing away. He died when I was very young of cancer. And I write about sort of playing the game and playing other games like it as an attempt at trying to reach him somehow. And the essay was published on Tor.com, now Reactor. And I know there's the rule, never read the comments, right? Never look at the comments. This is one time I'm glad I broke that rule, because there was one lady in the comments, and she wrote about how the same thing had happened to her son. Her son had lost his father when he was very young, and was playing all these video games, and was sort of like lost in video games, and the mother couldn't reach him, and she had no idea like how to talk to him or like how to help him. And she read the essay and said that, she believed it had given her new insight into how to reach herself. And like that, right, if nothing else good ever happened to me in my writing career, like I'd be fine because that thing happened to me. And like, I think that's an example of the, like, here's this thing that's very personal and very meaningful to me. And here I am sharing it with you, and hopefully something good can come of it.
I have one last very depressing question, and then I think we're going to go to audience questions. I meant to ask this earlier and not end on this note, but too late now. Someone else will have to ask a less depressing question when we open it up in a second. But I think it's not as big a question as it could be, because I think one of the things you're thinking through in this book is what comes of that demand to perform trauma and to what end. And so the idea that there's a lot of pressure sometimes on Black art in particular to kind of witness or perform a kind of, and not even just Black art, but on life in general, to kind of document the thing. And if in fact nobody who's perpetrating the problem actually feels bad about what they're doing, then that sort of performative atrocity doesn't actually make them feel bad or change their minds. And so this idea that we're stuck in this loop of constantly showing suffering may or may not get us anywhere, right? And so I think one of the things that I think you do really eloquently in this book is write about that without reproducing the trauma, kind of write about what it means to witness without kind of it being a litany of horrors or a catalog. And I wondered how you thought about that approach from a craft perspective, because I think it's sort of difficult to negotiate when you're writing about something traumatic, how much of it gets on the page and how it gets on the page in a way that's responsible to the reader.
Yeah, I mean, one thing and maybe this is just a thing that's been personally helpful to me, with a lot of my writing, I tend to be sort of, this is going to sound really weird, I tend to be sort of audience last. Like, I'm writing for myself first and foremost. And then, like, as it proceeds, I start to think about potential readers and people that this story may come into contact with. But really, it's just or mostly for me. And so I think that ends up sort of changing the barometer in terms of, like, okay, how much do I display on the page, or how angry do I let myself get, or like how sad do I let myself get, et cetera, et cetera. And I think this ties into the sort of previous answer. I think the personal relationship that the author has with the story ends up, like, I think, showing itself somehow in some magical, alchemical way to the reader. And so how I feel about the trauma and the efficacy or inefficacy of dramatizing it is somehow going to articulate itself to the reader, who may have their own opinions on the efficacy or inefficacy of that sort of thing. I mean, it's interesting because, like, there's the conundrum of the slave movie, right? And it's like, okay, another one. Like, how many more? Like, this is not fun to watch. Like, do we need another one of these? But then, like, the context of that, at least in this day and age, is like, these movies are existing in a place that's grown increasingly hostile to the teaching of that very history, right? So what do you do? And then you start to, think about notions of, like, duty. Oh, we have to remember this, or we have to, like, teach these in schools. We have to make sure our kids know about these things. And it's like, okay, maybe there is some use to the slave movie after all, which is a wild sentence to say, right? But it's like that sort of thing, right? And so I think part of where I find solace is that not everybody thinks like me. So I can be like, okay, I don't have to do that. I don't have to do that anymore. In part because, like, somebody else is going to do it, which is kind of like a selfish and lazy way of thinking about it. But at the same time, it does help me preserve myself and keep doing the things that I'm doing. So I think but the flip side of that is that, like, I'm not alone. We're not alone in what we do. So
thank you so much. And I'm going to hand it over to the
Hello, hi. We have 15 minutes for questions from our audience, both in person and online. If you, in person, have a question that you would like to ask in person, you will come up to the mic I am at, or the mic on the other side of the room where my compatriot is at. I will kick us off with a question from our online audience, which is an appetizer. Where do you see the internet going in the future?
Oh my goodness, in 5 words or less. I know, right? No, exactly. No, I do see it getting better, but I think it's going to get a lot worse before it gets better. And I'll do the better part first, because I do think people are getting more intentional about how they use the internet, and also like more intentional about curating their own spaces and understanding that it's not obligatory that I go to this place where, I go to this one website or I go to this one app where I'm guaranteed to just like feel bad for like 4 hours straight while I'm on this thing, right? So I do think that people are really starting to get more, again, intentional about how they use the space and whatnot. But I think also it's one of those things where increasingly the internet is less and less us. It used to be that everything that existed on the internet was just like us. It was like human beings. It was human generated, all of that. Now I think it's increasingly, I forget where I like heard this statistic or saw this study or something, but there was like a point that we had reached recently where I think it was 51% of all internet traffic was like bot generated, and humans made up only 49% of like all internet traffic, which is wild to me. But like, there's one way of interpreting that is that the place is being overrun by machines and human beings are less and less relevant in what happens in that space. Another interpretation is that like a lot of us are just going out and touching grass again. So like that's also a way of looking at it. But I don't know. I think a lot of it will boil down to like follow the money. And if there's I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I hope it gets better. Hopefully I'll be doing my part to help it get better. But I think part of it getting better is, I think at the end of the day, like us not being on it. And not like, I'm not saying like log off completely, but like, I think part of what made early internet so charming is that it was a place that we went to. And it didn't feel like a place that came to us, if that makes sense. We weren't running from anything when we went to the internet. And I think if we can better our circumstances offline, or if we can make offline life easier to live, or at least more desirable, then I think that might go a long way towards improving our online lives, I think.
Thank you.
Hi, yes. I really, I think I got a question from when you were talking about the story about the person who had the 2 monitors and they're coding or not coding, but rather filtering on Facebook, I guess, or wherever. And I'm 30, so I kind of grew up in that generation where it's like nothing was filtered as well. So I am kind of curious on a similar note to the future of the internet, but more so the future of the people. I was also sheltered, but then I still saw some of these killings, literal beheadings or whatever you would see online. And so it's interesting to me to see how we saw that both 20 years ago, but then we're also seeing a newer form of that in such things like the genocide and such like that. And so I am kind of curious, is that something that you see more people putting into AI? Are we trying to filter this, or is this more something that you think is as you were saying, as the internet grows or as people change their minds or spend less time on it, I tend to see a little bit of a disconnect. My son's only 4, but how is he going to look at the internet? Stuff like that.
Is there even going to be an internet?
Yeah.
No, I mean, I think that's such a big question, right? Like, it used to be if you wanted to see something extreme on the internet, you had to like go to a very specific place. You had to like know like Live Leak or like some other like really dark place that was like hidden off in like under the bushes. You had to do like an Elden Ring freaking side quest to like find this place, right? But I was able to see the Charlie Kirk assassination like immediately, like just like online. Which is wild to me. Like that type of thing used to be buried under like mountains and mountains and mountains of like URLs to get to. And now it's just like there. And as you point out, like that type of stuff is also getting fed into, AI so that, as it's scraping the internet, it's seeing all these like, horrible things that are happening. And so but at the same time, I think I think also the point that you raised about like the genocide is a very important one because there is also this like journalistic element to the atrocities. Like if we were like, filter all atrocity off of the internet whatsoever, like how much more difficult would it have become to understand or to know what was happening in Gaza, what is happening in Gaza, right? Like it would have been like, that it would almost be as though like at least to the rest of the world that stuff wasn't happening because it wasn't out there. People weren't learning about it. People weren't knowing about it. So like I don't know. The internet is like owned by like 5 people, right? Tops, right? And so I think a lot of the future of the internet in terms of content and the extremeness of that content and how widespread that content ends up becoming will be determined by what they see as the most profitable. And like that, the impetus so far seems to be like engagement. That's like the organizing principle is like, if it can get people staying online more, then we'll keep it online. I don't know that that's sustainable though. So I think I hope there's a point where like that changes, that calculus changes, and we start to sort of rethink our relationship with extreme content because it's not normal. Like it's really to like see some of the stuff that we're seeing online, right? Like it's not normal. It's really not. It's not normal. So like, yeah, hopefully we can like go outside more and recalibrate our relationships with each other. But thank you for your question. I know for a fact that I did not even come close to answering it.
That was awesome. Thank you. I just felt like it was like a ponder that I had to sort of put out there. So thank you.
I do have more online questions, but just kidding. We have some in-person people. Let's go.
Well, who are the 5 people who own the internet? Because I feel so dumb. I don't know who that is. So.
No, I mean, definitely Bezos, Larry Ellison.
Oh, gross.
Yeah, Zuckerberg, Musk, and who would be number 5? I feel like number 5 is like a dark horse figure. I'd have to think a little bit more about number 5, but there's definitely a number 5.
And so literally they control all of it?
Yeah, so like recently, AWS, Amazon Web Services, which is like, it's basically like the foundation for a lot, like on which a lot of internet functionality stands. It like went down and freaking a lot of the world stopped. Like when it went down, which is wild to me. Like everything from people not being able to use Venmo to like people not being able to like make their flights or book tickets or like all types of stuff. And so it quite literally is like this one dude owning like a chunk of the internet. And like when something of his doesn't work,
Right.
an entire side of the cathedral just like collapses. And that's just like, that's not safe.
No, that's crazy.
I'll think about who number 5 is though.
I think that it's difficult to have questions. I have a lot of thoughts. Like, you've sparked a lot of thoughts because the writing as you describe it in this book is a very introverted process in terms of you figuring out what you think and also the intrinsic motivation you have in writing this book. So when you put it out into the world, that's not what makes or breaks it. You're looking at what you got out of the process and thinking through these things. And I also think that you're an optimist. So you're looking at, what is this going to spark? What kinds of conversations might people have because of this? So you've already gotten the benefit of the process of writing it, but you're also putting it out there for more benefit. You're not thinking about, are people going to hate it? So like these large questions on policy to me are a little strange to ask because those are more extrapolation out into the world when you're talking about a very introverted, like introspective, figuring out what it all means process. So I really don't have a question, but it made me think about a lot of things.
Mission accomplished.
Are there any games that you're playing right now that you love?
I am on my 275th playthrough of Cyberpunk 2077. Speaking of like different endings, I platinumed that game and unlocked like every single ending to that game like twice, and I can't stop. I can't stop playing. Because it's so like I used to be pretty straightforward, like third person, single player, like Last of Us, like that type of thing, right? And then I started getting into open world RPGs. Fam. You want to talk about return on investment? Fam, one of those 70 hours easily of just like joy and human experience and like all this stuff. And the beautiful thing about it is at least when they're done well, there is so much to do in these games. Like I've played through Cyberpunk so many times that I can like quote storylines back to the game, right? I can finish the dialogue for these characters. I'm still finding new stuff in this game. So yeah, Cyberpunk. That's, yeah.
Good choice. And our last question of the evening.
I had a comment before I asked a question. I think that it's good that you hear like celebrities and just people on radio and in conversation talking about how they cut themselves off from Facebook or whatever for a month or a week, or they stopped using the internet either from them and their husband or their children, and what the reaction was to that. They couldn't sleep, they didn't know what was going on, but then they sort of like readjusted. And I think that's kind of like having too much chocolate cake, like it's kind of good. And again, we certainly don't know what's really happening around the world with people taking sort of individual responsibility for seeing too much or having too much. But it sort of reminds me of the 70s too. I'm old, so I lived through that, where it just was excess. I laugh when I hear kids today talking about sex because we did all that in the 70s between, not me personally, of course, yeah, whether it be drugs or I was in New York for a year, and again, people walked away, went back, had children, moved to the suburbs, and kind of made it through. So there's always some hope that maybe, and again, who knows what's going on worldwide, though it'll be a rotating basis because there'll always be new younger people coming up who will be like, wow. Like people used to take Lady Chatterley's Lover and read it, or Playboy, their father's Playboy, remember, and going in the bathroom. So maybe there's some hope in that direction. You mentioned way earlier, and since there weren't a lot of other questions, I have to ask you this. Why do you think that, or suspect, that the writer's strike in 2007 or 2008 led to the election of Donald Trump? Because I'm looking for any reason, that might.
So, I am so glad you asked. Allow me to adjust my tinfoil hat. 2007, the Writers Guild, like every 3 years, they have to renegotiate their deal with the AMPTP, basically the organization of producers and everything that, they make shows for and stuff. And so there was this was right at the beginning of stuff starting to be broadcast on the internet. So like, very, very like nascent YouTube. I think Hulu was maybe a thing at that point, but it was like the very beginning of people being able to watch stuff online. And one of the deal terms that was under negotiation was called new media. So basically what we know is streaming today. And the two parties, the WGA and the AMPTP, were at loggerheads. They couldn't agree. So the WGA went on strike. This is like 2007 going into 2008. And like, this is around the time, this is like season 1 of Breaking Bad, like around that era. And so this strike goes on, and basically what that means is scripted television is like done. No shows are being written, and because no shows are being written, they're not being filmed. Like, the actors aren't but the networks have to figure out, okay, how are we going to fill all this space? Enter reality TV. And so you get shows like Here Comes Honey Boo Boo, you get shows like Jersey Shore, like this flood of reality TV starts coming in. You also get a little show called The Apprentice. Exactly. The Apprentice, and that becomes Celebrity Apprentice, and all of a sudden you have this sort of reinvention of Donald Trump as this deal maker, as this businessman extraordinaire, and this is one of the ways in which he's able to sort of build this legend for himself as a guy on TV who's good at business because he can fire people, and like that is because the AMPTP tried to screw the Writers Guild out of residuals for streaming, and that is how we got to. I mean, that's one of the reasons, but a big reason why we got to 2016. I think Gamergate is like another part of the equation, but yeah, that's part of my Gamergate. Oh my goodness, I don't know that I have enough time to go to Gamergate, but yeah, no, that's some of the ways in which, online or the internet has so gravely influenced our offline life. Like, it was literally like residuals for streaming is what like led to all the reality TV that has butterfly affected itself to where we are now. It's wild. It's wild. They couldn't. The producers couldn't just give the guild what they wanted, and now look at us.
Please help
and
me.
we got to renegotiate next year.
Oh no. Please help me thank tonight's moderator, Danielle Evans. And tonight's author, Tochi Onyebuchi. And so now, books are still for sale outside by Snug Books. We will be outside in a couple of minutes to sign some books. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. You got a lot to think about. Thank you for coming out to have some big thoughts. We'll see you soon. Have a good night.